This city, with its thousand-year history, is the center of three world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For centuries, millions have turned their thoughts toward Jerusalem. It was built and destroyed, then rebuilt again. How was Jerusalem originally constructed, along with its jewel located on the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Beit al-Maqdis? Today you'll discover this story: the choice of death. Imagine a scene that defies comprehension. Thousands of people standing on a hill, wrapped in white shrouds. Living people, healthy, young and old, men, women, children, all in burial clothes, all waiting for death, not as a sentence, as a choice, because they chose it themselves. This was during the time of Prophet Dawood. The people of Israel had multiplied to such an extent that the prophet himself was astonished by their numbers. The blessing of the Most High had descended upon Abraham's descendants, and they filled Palestine like a river fills a valley during flood season. Cities grew, villages multiplied, children were born with such frequency that keeping count became impossible. Dawood decided to count them, not from pride, from practical necessity. A ruler must know how many people live under his authority, how many warriors he can field, how many mouths need feeding, how many souls need guidance. But he couldn't. No matter how hard the scribes tried, no matter how many census takers were sent to cities and villages, the number eluded them. Each new count gave a different result. People were arriving faster than they could be recorded. And then came the revelation, not comforting, harsh. The voice of the Most High sounded in Dawood's soul with the cold clarity of a verdict. You cannot know the number of those I have multiplied through my blessing. Now I shall reduce it by sending calamity. Let them choose one of three. Three options, three paths of suffering: famine lasting 3 years, enemy invasion for 3 months, or death for 3 days. Dawood gathered the elders, conveyed to them the words of revelation. Imagine this assembly: gray-bearded sages who had survived wars and droughts, listening as their prophet offers them the choice of their own destruction, not asking advice on how to avoid calamity, but choosing which calamity will befall them. They deliberated briefly. 3 years of famine meant slow agony, watching your children turn into skeletons wrapped in skin, mothers drying up, unable to feed infants, strong men becoming shadows, unable to rise from bed. 3 years listening to the moans of the dying, seeing the empty eyes of those too weak even for tears. 3 months of war meant blood, burned cities, raped women, murdered children, slavery for survivors. Enemies showed no mercy. They came not merely to conquer, they came to annihilate, humiliate, erase from the face of the earth. 3 days of death seemed merciful, quick, without the torments of hunger or the horrors of war. 3 days, and it would end. Those destined to die would die. The rest would continue living. They chose death. The news spread across all the land of Israel. Prepare for your end. 3 days, beginning tomorrow at dawn. Dawood commanded the people to prepare as one prepares for burial, and they prepared. What happened next was so surreal that even describing it is terrifying. An entire nation began preparing for death. Not the chosen few, not the condemned. Everyone. They performed ritual ablution. As before prayer, as before funerals. Water streamed from their bodies, washing away the dirt of life. Men washed their beards. Women combed their hair for the last time. Children splashed in the baths, not understanding why, but obeying their parents. Then they took out shrouds, white burial cloths usually kept for the dead. Now the living wrapped themselves in them. Imagine this city, thousands of people in white garments, slowly moving through the streets like ghosts of their own funerals. The elderly did this calmly. They had lived enough, seen enough. Death was to them a familiar, almost welcome guest. Young mothers swaddled their infants in shrouds, and tears dripped onto the white fabric, leaving damp spots. Warriors who had faced death hundreds of times on battlefields now prepared to meet it without weapons, without armor, only in thin burial cloth. They gathered on high ground, not in the temple, not in shelter, on an open hill where wind moved freely between bodies, where the sky was close, where the Most High could see them all at once. The hill transformed into a sea of white. Thousands of figures wrapped in shrouds sat, stood, lay on the grass. Some prayed, others simply gazed at the sky, waiting. Children pressed against parents. The elderly closed their eyes, ready not to open them again. The air was filled with whispered prayers, thousands of voices merging into one continuous hum, requests for mercy, for forgiveness, for easy death. The sound was like the buzzing of an enormous hive, like the rustling of forest leaves before a storm. The sun was setting. Last rays painted the white shrouds pink and gold. The beauty of this sight was eerie. An army of ghosts awaiting their end, bathed in pre-sunset light. Night came. Cold, starry. People didn't disperse. They remained there, on the hill, under open sky. Waiting for death transformed into collective meditation, into an act of submission to the Creator's will, into the final prayer of a people who chose to die quickly rather than slowly. The plague. Dawn of the first day came quietly. The sun rose above the horizon, painting the sky crimson, the color of blood, the color of life about to leave thousands of bodies. And then it began. Plague doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes quietly like a thief in the night. The first fell ill at dawn. Fever gripped their bodies, skin covered with buboes, black swellings filled with pus and blood. Throats went dry, breathing became ragged. They began dying before noon. Not slowly. The plague sent by the Most High was merciless. Bodies convulsed. Foam came from mouths. Eyes rolled back. And it ended. By evening of the first day, thousands lay dead. Thousands. On that very hill where they had gathered in shrouds, white fabric became true shrouds. Those who prepared for death symbolically found it in reality. The living looked upon the dead, horror mixed with submission. This is what they chose. 3 days of death. The first day claimed thousands. How many would the second claim? The third? Would anyone remain alive when it ended? The hill transformed into a mass graveyard. The smell of death began rising into the air. Sickly, sweet, nauseating aroma from which the living covered their faces with the edges of their shrouds. The night of the second day was a nightmare. The moans of the dying mixed with prayers of the living. Plague continued its work, ruthlessly, methodically, selecting victims indiscriminately, young and old, righteous and sinful, strong and weak. Dawood met the dawn of the second day on his knees, not in his palace, on that same hill among his dying people. He was their king, their prophet, their shepherd, and he couldn't simply watch them perish. His hands were raised to heaven, face wet with tears, voice breaking from the scream tearing from his chest. This was not merely prayer. This was a wail of despair clothed in words of submission. O Lord, have mercy on them. Direct all the calamity that should fall upon my people onto me. Take my life instead of their lives. I am ready. A mad request. One life for thousands. One soul for an entire nation. But Dawood was no ordinary man. He was a prophet, chosen by the Most High. His words carried weight that ordinary mortals' words did not. Silence fell upon the hill. Not physical silence. The moans continued. Prayers didn't cease. But there was another kind of silence, spiritual, as if the heavens were listening. And the plague stopped. Not gradually, instantly. Those on the brink of death suddenly felt the fever recede. Buboes began shrinking. Breathing evened out. Life that a second ago was leaving bodies returned. Dawood stood. His face shone not with joy, with relief mixed with awe. Mercy had been granted. Prayer had been heard. The people saved. He addressed the people. His voice, hoarse from screaming, carried across the hill. "The Most High has pardoned you. The plague has retreated. Raise praise to him." But people didn't know how. They were prepared to die. They knew how to pray for mercy, but how to properly thank for salvation from death they themselves chose? With what words? What actions? Dawood understood their confusion, and then he spoke words that would change this place forever. "Build a mosque here, on this hill where the Most High showed you mercy. Let this place become a house of prayer. Let every stone in it be gratitude to the Creator for granted life." The first temple construction began immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right away, while memory of the miracle was fresh, while the smell of death still hung in the air, while shrouds still hadn't been removed from bodies. People began gathering stones, heavy, unhewn boulders that had to be hauled from quarries several kilometers away. Young men carried them on shoulders. Old men rolled them on primitive carts. Women brought smaller stones, piling them in heaps. And Dawood did what no king before him had done, and none after would do. He, prophet and ruler, man whom thousands obeyed, hauled stones on his own back. Imagine this picture: a king in dusty clothing, bent under the weight of a boulder, walking in line with common workers, sweat streaming down his face, back aching, hands scraped raw. But he doesn't stop. Every stone he carries is prayer, every step an act of gratitude. The people watched him and couldn't remain idle. If the king works, how can subjects rest? Construction transformed into mass movement. Thousands of hands united by one goal: create God's house in the place where death retreated. The foundation grew, stone upon stone, row after row. Walls began rising from the earth like prayer rises to heaven. Without architects, without blueprints, only pure intention embodied in stone and sweat. Walls grew, slowly, painfully, but inexorably. Each day brought new rows of stones. Each week the building rose higher. Dawood continued carrying stones on his back, even when his body screamed with pain, even as age made itself known more strongly. Years of construction aged him. The back that once was straight as a spear now bent. Hands that held sword and harp became calloused from stones. Face furrowed with wrinkles carved not by time, but by labor. But the temple grew. It rose above the hill, towering over the surroundings. Travelers saw it from afar. Caravans changed routes to glimpse the miracle being created by an entire people's hands. And then the walls reached human height. Dawood stood inside the unfinished building, surrounded by stones he himself had hauled on his back. He raised his hand to touch the upper edge of the wall. His fingers easily reached it. A little more, and the walls would be higher than him. He tried to lift the next stone, a heavy boulder he'd lifted thousands of times before. But this time his body didn't obey. His back gave out, hands trembled. The stone slipped and fell at his feet with a dull thud. Dawood tried again, and again, over and over. But each attempt ended the same. His body, exhausted by years of labor, could do no more. Physical limit reached. He fell to his knees among the stones, not from weakness, from despair. The temple unfinished, work incomplete, vow unfulfilled, and he could continue no longer. Revelation came quietly, like comfort, like explanation, like prophecy. Not for you to complete this construction. The rest will be taken on by your son, Suleiman. Suleiman. There was no son yet. He wasn't even conceived. But the Most High had already named him, already determined his fate, already appointed him to finish what the Father began. Dawood rose from his knees, looked at the unfinished walls, at stones awaiting their turn, at the incomplete mosque that would stand thus, unfinished, until his son's birth. People didn't understand why the prophet stopped work. They offered help, offered to finish themselves, but Dawood forbade it. This wasn't his decision. This was the will of the Most High. The temple would wait, stones would lie dormant. Time would stop until he came who was destined to complete what was begun. Suleiman and the Jinn. Years passed. Dawood aged further. A son appeared, a boy named with the name the Most High revealed before his birth, Suleiman. The child grew, knowing he must complete his father's work. This knowledge was both gift and curse. When Dawood died, power passed to Suleiman, young, strong, endowed with gifts his father lacked. The Lord gave him not only prophecy, he gave him power over what doesn't submit to ordinary humans, power over jinn, beings of smokeless fire who inhabited earth long before humans, power over shayateen, those who rebelled against order but were forced to submit to the prophet's will, power over wind, over birds, over all creation. Suleiman stood before the unfinished temple. Walls his father left at human height had waited for continuation for decades. Stones prepared for construction were covered with moss and dust. He wouldn't carry them on his back like his father. He had different workers. Suleiman summoned them all, jinn from deserts and mountains, shayateen from underground caves, humans from all tribes of Israel, an army of builders the likes of which the world had never seen and would never see again. The jinn were enormous, some tall as trees. Their bodies shimmered like desert mirages. They moved faster than wind and could lift stones 100 men couldn't budge. But they were rebellious, wild, dangerous, obeyed only force, and Suleiman possessed force granted from above. The shayateen were different, smaller than jinn, but craftier. Their faces were twisted with malice they couldn't hide even beneath masks of submission. They hated serving. Every stone they laid for the Most High's temple burned them like red-hot iron, but they couldn't refuse. Suleiman's authority was absolute. Humans worked alongside these beings. Imagine this horror. A simple mason standing shoulder to shoulder with a jinn whose hands could crush him like a fly. A carpenter hearing the hissing of a shaitan sharpening tools beside him. It was unnatural, but under Suleiman's rule, the impossible became commonplace. First they built the city, Jerusalem, not from simple stone, from precious materials the jinn mined from mountain depths where human foot had never trod. White marble that shines in sunlight, red porphyry, color of clotted blood, black obsidian, deep as night. Streets were laid so every turn, every corner was perfect. Houses grew like mushrooms after rain, but each was a work of art. The city transformed into a pearl without equal on earth. But the city was only preparation. The real work began when they tackled the temple. Suleiman sent groups of shayateen across the world. Some went to ocean depths, where pearls the size of fists lay. Others flew to mountains where caves concealed deposits of gold and silver. A third group gathered musk and ambergris, fragrances worth more than their weight in precious metals. They dove into waters where pressure would crush a human. They penetrated caves filled with poisonous gases. They worked in heat that melted stones, and they brought treasures to Suleiman's feet. Pearls poured in heaps, each pearl perfect, round, glowing from within with milky radiance. They were embedded in the temple walls. Thousands, tens of thousands. Walls covered with them like sky covered with stars. Gold and silver were melted, formed, woven into patterns of incredible complexity. Jinn, whose hands didn't fear molten metal, created ornaments the human eye could barely trace. Spirals, interlacing, geometric patterns forming the names of the Most High in languages forgotten or yet unborn. Precious stones were extracted from Earth's depths, emeralds green as spring grass, rubies red as fire's heart, sapphires blue as midday sky, diamonds clear as tears. They were faceted, polished, and embedded in ceilings, in floors, in columns. Work continued for years, but time held no meaning when workers don't tire or age. Jinn could labor for weeks without rest. Shayateen needed no sleep. Only humans, mortal witnesses to this miracle, changed generations while watching the temple grow. And finally, it was completed. Beit al-Maqdis, the House of Holiness. Al-Aqsa Mosque, the farthest mosque. At night it glowed, not from torches, from its very essence. Pearls in the walls caught moonlight and reflected it, multiplied 1,000-fold. Gold and silver shimmered, precious stones sparkled. The building pulsed with light like a living being breathing radiance. Travelers saw it from kilometers away. A glow in the night, a beacon pointing to the place where heavenly touched earthly, where the world's treasures were used to create a house of prayer. The great sacrifice. The temple was ready. Suleiman declared a celebration. Not ordinary, the greatest celebration earth had seen. News flew to all lands subject to the king prophet, and his authority extended far. From sea to sea, from deserts to mountains, people came by the thousands. Caravans stretched toward Jerusalem like rivers flowing to ocean. They came to see the miracle. A temple built by jinn and shayateen. A building that glows at night. The place where the Most High spared the people from plague, and where now stands the most beautiful structure on earth. The celebration began with sacrifices, but their scale was insane. 25,000 head of cattle. Imagine these herds. Cows and bulls led to altars. Their lowing filled the air. The smell of their blood, spilled in the name of the Most High, mixed with incense fragrance. 40,000 sheep, white, woolly, bleeding. They were slaughtered ritually, prayers spoken over each. Blood flowed in streams, staining the earth dark red. Meat was distributed as sadaqah, as alms to the poor. No one should leave hungry on this day. 1,000 camels, enormous humped animals of the desert. They were sacrificed last, the most valuable, most expensive, because a camel is a nomad's wealth, his life in the desert. To give 1,000 camels meant offering an entire fortune to the Most High. The smell of blood and burning meat was so strong the air seemed thick. Smoke from altars rose in columns toward heaven, black, dense, carrying prayers upward with ash. Suleiman walked through this hell of smells and sounds to Sakratullah, the sacred rock, the place where, according to tradition, the connection between heaven and earth was thinnest. There he brought his personal sacrifice, not the largest, but the most important. He stood by the rock, hands raised to heaven, blood of sacrifice still steaming at his feet, and he began to pray, not just to thank, to ask, for blessing upon this place, for mercy toward those who would come here. Let everyone who enters this temple and performs a prayer of 2 rakats become pure of sins, like a newborn. Let this place become refuge for the frightened. Let the sick find healing here. Let the poor become rich. Let sinners be forgiven if they raise their pleas to you here. The requests were bold, incredible. Suleiman asked to transform this place into a point where prayers have special power, where the Most High listens more attentively, where mercy pours more generously. And then he spoke the last words. If my plea is accepted, if you approve these requests, give me a sign. Accept my sacrifice. Silence. Absolute silence fell upon the place where a second ago thousands of voices hummed. People froze. Suleiman stood motionless, hands raised, eyes fixed on heaven. And then the sky split open. Not metaphorically, fire descended from the heavens. Not lightning, fire of another nature. White, blinding, pure. It fell upon Suleiman's sacrifice and consumed it instantly. Meat, blood, bones, everything vanished in this flame. Didn't burn, dissolved, accepted. People fell prostrate, not from fear, from awe. They had just witnessed a miracle, fire from heaven, sign of sacrifice's acceptance, proof that Suleiman's prayers were heard, that the blessings he requested were granted. But the fire didn't go out. It continued burning where it touched earth. A small flame the size of a human palm, white, not scorching, not spreading, just burning. Burning without fuel, without wood, without oil. This flame burned for years, decades, centuries. People came to see it. Fire that doesn't extinguish, that needs no feeding, that was kindled by heaven and continued burning as reminder of that day. The dark foundation. But Jerusalem's story didn't end there. The temple, built by jinn and shayateen, adorned with the world's treasures, sanctified by fire from heaven, would become an apple of discord. They would fight over it. It would be destroyed and rebuilt again. Blood would spill on its stones in quantities exceeding those sacrifices. And deep beneath the temple, in caves dug by shayateen, they say traces of their work remained. Claw scratches on stones, sulfur smell that doesn't dissipate, whispers in dead languages heard by those who descend too deep. The jinn and shayateen who built this place hated every moment of work. Their torment was woven into the stones just like pearls and gold. And some say this is why the temple never knew true peace, that the curses of those who built it against their will remained in its foundation. That holiness and curse intertwined in this place so tightly they cannot be separated. The fire continued burning, white, pure, unquenchable. But what if it's not only a sign of acceptance? What if it's also a warning? Fire that never goes out in a place that never knows rest. The question remains unanswered. The temple stands, the fire extinguished centuries ago, but memory of it lives. And everyone who comes there to pray walks on stones that remember the touch of beings made of fire, on floors soaked with blood of 25,000 sacrifices, on a place where heaven touched earth so closely it left a mark that time cannot erase. This is how Jerusalem was built, by a prophet who carried stones on his aging back, by a king who commanded beings of fire and shadow, by sacrifice so vast the earth itself trembled, by prayer so powerful heaven answered with flame. And this is why 3 religions claim it, why blood continues to spill for it, why its very name carries weight that crushes hearts. Because it was never just a city, it was the place where death chose life, where heaven split open, where the impossible became stone and mortar, where jinn and shayateen and humans worked together to build something that transcended all of them. The jewel on the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque, built on the bones of thousands, adorned with treasures of earth, sanctified by fire from heaven, cursed and blessed in equal measure. This is how it was built. This is why it endures. This is why it will never know peace.